Now, what doesn't the media want you to know about investing and money? That's going to be the topic of today's video. Now, number one, the reality is the media doesn't know that much about investing or what's going to come in the future, certainly. One of my favorite quotes is from Steve Forbes, the owner of Forbes magazine. And I'm going to paraphrase it, but I'll put it on the screen as well. And he says something like, in the magazine industry, we make a lot more money from giving advice than following our own advice, and we rely on the short memories of our readers. So basically, he's alluding to the fact that if a columnist gets one prediction right, he or she will probably get the next one wrong. If people actually kind of Googled these kind of things, they've become more skeptical. And the reality is, study after study has shown that if you listen to so-called media gurus, you won't actually beat the market. There was one study that was done by CX, I think it was CXO Group. Again, I'll put a link at the bottom. They looked at all the major contributors on, CNBC, Bloomberg, and so on, and they looked at where following the advice over a long period of time would lead to you beating the market. And basically, none of the so-called gurus would help you beat the market. The only people then adding value were those contributors coming on with the boring advice, buy and hold, don't panic or whatever. But this leads me on to number two. Let's face it, the media is there to sensationalize. They're there to get bums on seats. If I started my own media channel, my job is not to educate. My job is to get more viewers. That sounds obvious, but that leads us back full circle, that those so-called boring guests that are giving some really good advice, they're not actually going to put more bums on seats. It's far more entertaining to have somebody come in there saying, markets are going to crash by 60% or Tesla's going to go to the moon or whatever. If you've got a really excitable guest that's given either very, very fearful advice or is very optimistic, unrealistically optimistic, that's going to get more bums on seats. However, linked to that, number three, fear is a stronger emotion than greed. It's been shown time and time again. If you have a doom-mongering headline, it always gets bums on seats. So whatever bleeds, leads. That's a great one-liner that tells you all you want to know about the media. And it's not just in finance and investing, right? Of course, if you're running a newspaper company and you say something like, oh, we're going to get invaded by, immigrants, or I don't know, the rich are going to get so rich that, everyone's going to be poor, and they're trying to say there's a correlation. Well, whatever it is, a fearful headline or a fearful guest will keep bums on seats. If you say something like, well, after the break, we're going to be talking to a gentleman who thinks that this is going to be the worst bear market since the 1930s, you could lose all your money. Of course, you're more likely to stay tuned than if someone's going to say, well, I don't really know what's going to happen next year. But the reality is nobody truly knows what happens, what will happen. I don't know one person who predicted that the US stock market would go up 30% last year. I don't know one person who thought what would happen with Corona would happen and that the markets will recover so quickly. So nobody actually really knows. But most of these TV shows, they never get on those kind of guests. The only exception is this. When it comes to somebody who clearly has so much gravitas that you can't ignore them, then they allowed them on. So for example, Jack Bogle, before his death, the Vanguard founder, he would be allowed on, but he's Jack Bogle, right? So he's one of the most famous people in the investing world. So even though he would say the same thing time and time again, buy and hold, the evidence shows you should be diversified, blah, blah, blah. Because he's Jack Bogle, people allowed him on. Likewise, Warren Buffett's advice, at least for DIY investors, but not for maybe professional investors, is very much aligned with what Jack Bogle said. But if Warren Buffett comes on CNBC and Bloomberg and says, you should buy and hold, you should just invest in the market, you shouldn't predict. He's Warren Buffett, right? Even more than Jack Bogle, he's going to be allowed on to say that kind of thing. But those are extreme cases. With most of the guests, they're going to kind of bring on the loudmouth or the sensationalist or whatever, the person who can scare you. So the reality is, the bottom line is, if you switch off the media, you're more likely to get good returns in investing. A great example of this is that a lot of studies have shown that dead people's investing accounts do far better than the living, even better than professional investors. Because if you think about it, they're not panicking when the market's down. They're not reading the media. They're not reading reports saying, oh, if Biden wins, markets are going to soar or crash. If Trump wins, this is going to happen or that's going to happen. So at the end of the day, if you just block out the news media and keep to a very sensible long-term strategy, you're more likely to do better than somebody who's always trying to be cute and look at trends and so on. So many of people I know, the huge mistake they make is they'll have a really good strategy, but then they'll read something in the media and then that will kind of put them off. So they'll read something like, indexing is a bubble, or this is going to happen, or that's going to happen. And then they think, oh, is this the right decision? So in most situations, it makes a lot of sense not to focus on some of the biggest, news channels out there. If you really want to consume media, something like Vanguard.com or very dry academic work is going to be much better for you, but most people don't want to read that. Okay, everyone, I've got some really exciting news today. So for a couple of years now, many people have asked me, well, look, I can't afford your minimum investments, but I really like your advice. I don't know if you can do this or you can do that, or you can help me in that way, or you can't help me in that way. I've always said, no, I can only do this or that, but I've got some really exciting news, and that's that in a couple of months before the end of the year, I will be bringing out what I'm calling the Adam Fayed Academy, which will have many new areas which will be of interest to people. So things like mentoring, tutoring, all those kind of things that people have asked me for in the past. So stay tuned. I'm going to be announcing it in the next few months, but I thought I would tell it to you guys before. Let me know if there's anything in particular that you're looking for in this academy. We're going to be focusing on many different areas, including how to invest productively, also some business areas, because that's another thing people have asked me about before. So stay tuned, and I'll keep you up to date.